A married couple lived in a small house in Japan with their son and daughter. The son was very angry with his sister and wanted to play a really nasty prank on her. He decided that he would secretly videotape her on the toilet and then post the video online. He wanted to humiliate his sister in front of her friends. The boy hid the video camera under the toilet in the bathroom. Minutes later, his sister went to the bathroom and locked the door behind her. She never came out again. Her mother started to wonder what was taking her daughter so long. She banged on the bathroom door and called out her daughter's name, but got no reply. Worried, she told her husband, and eventually they managed to force the door open. What they found inside the bathroom filled them with horror. Their daughter was lying in a pool of blood on the tile floor. She had been stabbed to death. Her face was so sliced up that she was unrecognizable, and her tongue had been cut out. There was a bloody sickle lying on the floor beside her. The police were called immediately. They came to investigate the scene. Inspecting the bathroom, they found that it posed a mystery. The door had been locked from the inside. The window was securely latched, and the bathroom was so small that nobody could have been hiding inside it, lying in wait for the girl. So, how was she murdered? The police saw that the only possible entrance was a small vent in the wall that measured only 10 inches by 10 inches. Nobody could have fit through such a small space. The police were absolutely stumped. They could not figure out how anyone would have gotten inside to kill the girl. The police carefully dusted the sickle for fingerprints, but unfortunately, they found none. At this point, they felt that the case would never be solved. They questioned the mother and father, but when it came time to question the son, who was nowhere to be found, they searched the house and eventually found him curled up in the wardrobe. His eyes were wild, and he was sobbing uncontrollably. His hands were shaking violently. They noticed that he was holding a video camera. Unable to question him, the police decided to review the videotape. What they saw in the footage would terrify them for years to come. They pressed play on the video camera, and the screen showed the young girl sitting on the toilet. When she finished, she stood up. The police noticed some movement in the small vent behind the toilet. A tiny figure emerged noisily from the vent. It was carrying a sickle. The policemen could hardly believe what they were looking at. The figure measured only 6 inches in height. It jumped onto the girl's back, and before she had a chance to scream, it sliced open her throat with the sickle. Then it began stabbing the girl until she was dead. But the horror was not over. The tiny figure sliced up the girl's face and cut out her tongue. Afterwards, the figure approached the video camera. The figure's face was that of a gnarled and wrinkled old woman. It looked directly into the lens and hissed, "You're next!" Then, the tiny figure disappeared back through the small vent, carrying the girl's severed tongue. After watching the videotape, the police officers wiped tears from their eyes. Some became nauseous and some vomited on the floor. Today, the case remains unsolved, and the tiny woman has never been identified. The videotape still exists, but the police refuse to release it. It sits in an evidence locker at the police station. The police call this case the Sickle Mystery and refuse to discuss it with the media. It was Halloween night in 2004, and a young boy was being picked on by his brother and some older kids from school. They dared the young boy to go into the graveyard at midnight with a bunch of garlands and place one on each of the gravestones. Not wanting them to think he was a coward, the young boy accepted the challenge. It was a moonless night, and the inside of the cemetery was pitch black. The rusty gates of the cemetery opened with a creak, and the boy cautiously entered. He looked at his watch. It was midnight, the witching hour. Clutching the garlands tightly, he made his way to the middle of the graveyard. He was shaking with fear, but he tried to steady his nerves. He was afraid that if he returned without completing the task, the older boys would laugh at him. Moving slowly through the cemetery, he got the distinct feeling that someone or something was watching him. Finally, he managed to place each garland on the gravestone, and his task was complete. "Well, that's all of them," he whispered to himself. Just then, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder as a voice hissed, "You forgot mine." An African-American family moved into a new home in Florida. The family consisted of Natasha, 17, Clifton, 14, and their parents Ben and Monica Houston. Clifton loved the new home. He would run through the house and hide from his parents when called to do chores. Clifton decided, since it was the day before Halloween, he wanted to scare his older sister Natasha. He hid in her closet, then decided to wait for her to walk into her room. As he waited, he became bored. Some time went by. He then decided to leave. He went to open the closet door to leave, but as he did, he noticed a hand reaching up from under the covers of his sister's bed. Its fingers moved and started to come towards him. Clifton yelled, jumping out of the closet and running out of the bedroom. He ran to his parents' room, crying and shouting, "There's a ghost in Natasha's bedroom." His father asked him why was he in there, and Clifton told him what he was planning on doing. Clifton's father went to go look after feeling worried, judging by the way his son looked. He walked into the room and saw nothing out of place, just a well-kept room with a made bed. He went back to his room and told his son he must have been daydreaming or something. The boy kept telling his mother and father over and over again that a hand came out of the bed, but they would not believe him. The mother decided to keep what her son told them a secret by making him promise not to tell his sister. The parents didn't want their daughter scared of her own room or things Clifton was saying. That night, Clifton tried to sleep. He heard his sister come in from the front door. She had been in cheerleading practice all day and hanging out with her new friends. Clifton got out of bed and peeked out his door at his sister. She rolled her eyes at him as she passed by. Clifton wanted to tell her so bad what he encountered, but knew he would get in trouble with his parents. Instead, he asked her how was her day. She smiled and said it was awesome. She thanked him with a grin as she walked into her bedroom, dropping her things on the floor and falling on her bed with her arms out. Clifton stood in the doorway waiting for the hand to appear, or for his sister to jump out of the bed screaming, but nothing happened. Natasha looked up to see her brother looking at her with large scared eyes. She thought he was just being weird. She got out of bed, then closed her door. The hallway was dark. Clifton stood in the dark, trembling, remembering everything he saw earlier that day. He then decided to go to bed. He got in bed, closed his eyes, then drifted off. Natasha took a shower, brushed her teeth, put on her nightgown, and hopped into bed. She browsed her cell phone text messages and checked out her Facebook. She then laid back and stared at the light coming from her small fish tank in the corner of her bedroom. Her eyes got heavy, and then she fell asleep. As she slept, her bed started to vibrate a little. Then it stopped. A lump appeared near the right side of her. as her back is turned to it. The lump formed into a hand, a large hand with large fingers. The bed sheets covered the whole hand as it poked out from the bed. It moved over to Natasha slowly. It then touched her thigh gently. The hand then moved away, sinking back into the bed. Natasha woke up, then looked around as she kept her head on her pillow. She then closed her eyes, then fell back to sleep. 5 minutes passed. The hand reappeared, emerging from the front of her and slowly making its way over to her face. It stopped, then moved away, going down underneath her blanket. The pattern of the hand is seen moving up and down her leg like some unseen entity. Natasha snapped out of her dream. She sat up in bed with her hair in her face. She tossed her blanket from her lower half. All she could see is her legs, her nightgown, and her bed sheets. She touched her legs, rubbing them.
"What was that?"
Natasha says to herself. She knew she felt something. She thought it was something in her dream that maybe it just felt so real, it made her feel it in real life. She looked at her closet, then at her walls. She then put her head back down on her pillow. Her eyes widened as she laid there staring straight ahead. A part of her bed sheet stuck up in the shape of a person lying right next to her. The formation of a face is seen under the covers facing her. She could see the outline of eyes, a nose, and a mouth. Natasha laid there with her heart racing, not realizing if she was awake or dreaming. She wanted to scream, but she was confused to what she was looking at in the dark. Could it be just covers bunched up, or two of her pillows she had pushed together? She thought to herself. All that didn't matter, as the bed sheets moved where the outline of the mouth is seen, like someone was breathing. Natasha's instincts kicked in. She went to scream, but then a hand came out from the other side of the bed, covering her mouth. Then another hand came up, shooting across her stomach, pressing down. Soon, more hands came out, grabbing her limbs, her ankles, her wrist, her neck. She screamed, and her screams were muffled as her body was being forced downward into the bed. She tried to move but couldn't. Then, as she went down, she could see the sides of the bed sheets covering her. Her eyes widened as everything began to fade into darkness. In the morning, the Houston family always had a family breakfast before school and work. The father sat in the kitchen talking on his phone with a friend. The mother had just pulled a pan of freshly made biscuits from the oven. Clifton came out of his room. He was drowsy as he walked out into the hallway. He smelled his mother's cooking and smiled a bit. He then remembered the hand in the bed. He rubbed his eyes, then knocked on his sister's bedroom door. The door opened as he knocked. He stood there looking in. The room was quiet, with no sign of his sister, just a well-made bed. Everything as it was on the day he hid in the closet. Clifton stared at the bed intensely, thinking at any time something would happen. After 2 minutes of staring, he decided he must have just been seeing things, and his dad was right. He closed the door, then went downstairs to eat breakfast. As the door closed, the form of Natasha's face appears out of the bed sheet, screaming a silent scream. The bed shakes, then it stops as her face slowly goes away, leaving the bed as it was before. Natasha was never seen again. A bus driver was traveling down a deserted street when he saw a beautiful young woman at the side of the road. He halted at the bus stop and she climbed aboard. The woman took a seat at the back of the bus and stared straight ahead. When the bus driver looked in his mirror, he noticed that the woman was staring directly at him, never blinking. But when he looked back over his shoulder, the woman was sitting with her back to him. The driver began to get really creeped out. He couldn't understand what was going on. Then he came to the end of his route. It was the last stop, and he pulled over and opened the doors of the bus. The woman didn't get out. She just sat there, motionless, with her back to him. The driver walked towards the back of the bus and saw that the woman was covering her face with her hands. He tried talking to her, but she wouldn't answer. He took hold of her arms and tried to make her show her face. The woman refused and struggled out of his grip. Finally, she spoke. "You will not like what you see." And suddenly, she dropped her hands and turned. Her face was horribly disfigured. Lumps of flesh were falling off, and her skeleton face could be seen beneath. It is said that they found the bus driver the next morning lying unconscious outside the bus. He spent 2 weeks in a coma, and when he awoke, he had lost all control of his senses. They put him in a mental institution, and this is the story he told from his cell. There were 2 young girls named Emma and Veronica who lived on the same street. It was Halloween night, and Emma's parents had gone away for the weekend. She was a little nervous about being on her own in the house overnight, so she invited her friend Veronica over to keep her company. The girls planned to have a sleepover. During the day, they swapped clothes and did each other's hair and nails. In the evening, they ordered a pizza and watched a horror movie. Now and then, a group of kids would ring the doorbell and yell out, "Trick or treat." The 2 girls had fun handing out all the Halloween candy. Afterwards, the girls spent a long time chatting and gossiping about the other kids in their school. Before they knew it, it was past midnight. The girls were both very tired, so they decided it was time to go to sleep. Emma got into her own bed, while Veronica had to sleep on the futon on the floor. The room was completely silent, and Emma was gradually drifting off to sleep. Just then, Veronica sat up and began shaking her friend. "Come on, let's go downstairs and get some ice cream," she said loudly. Emma was very sleepy and muttered, "I'm not hungry." "Well, I am," replied Veronica. "Come on, let's go downstairs." Emma turned over in bed. "There's no ice cream in the freezer," she moaned drowsily. "We ate it all." "Then, let's go to the store and buy some," said Veronica. "I don't want any," mumbled her friend. You go on your own." "No, it's not safe to walk alone at night," Veronica whined. "Come on, let's go." Emma lay in bed and tried to ignore her. "Please, Emma," Veronica started crying. "Please, I really want some ice cream." Tears were streaming down her face. Emma was exasperated. She was sick and tired of listening to her friend whine. "Oh my God, Veronica, okay," she shouted. "If it's that important to you, then I'll go to the shop with you. Just calm down." The girls quickly got dressed and put on their coats. As soon as they left the house, however, Veronica grabbed her friend's hand and started dragging her the opposite direction. "This isn't the way to the store," said Emma. "Shh," hissed Veronica. "We're going to the police station." When I looked in the mirror, I saw a man with an axe hiding under your bed. The story goes that a few years ago, a group of friends planned to spend Halloween in a cemetery close to where they lived. There were 2 boys named Carlos and Miguel, and 2 girls named Carla and Michelle. They were all 16 years old. Initially, when they heard the idea, the girls refused to go. Carla said she had a bad feeling about it. However, the boys managed to convince them to change their minds. Finally, Halloween night arrived, and the teenagers met at Miguel's house and drove to the cemetery together. When they arrived, there was so much fog that they couldn't hardly see. The cemetery gates were locked. Standing outside, they heard strange and eerie sounds coming from the graveyard. The girls were scared and suggested that they go home. Michelle said that she regretted agreeing to the idea in the first place because she had a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. But the boys refused to let them leave. "Don't be a baby," scoffed Miguel. "We didn't travel this far just to look at cemetery gates and go home. It's Halloween, Devil's Night." Carlos was about to climb over the cemetery gates, but when he grabbed hold of the metal bars, the gate swung open in front of him with an ominous creak. Suddenly, they heard the bells of the nearby chapel striking midnight. A dog howled, and the moon was obscured by clouds. The wind rose up and began to whistle through the trees. Miguel took the Ouija board out from under his coat. "It's time to summon the spirits," he said with a mischievous grin. "Don't worry, it's just a game," said Carlos, trying to reassure the 2 girls that nothing will happen. "Nothing will happen? There's nothing to be scared of." The group of teenagers walked into the cemetery, and when they reached a small tomb in the middle, they stopped. Miguel laid the Ouija board on top of the cold stone, and they all gathered around it. They placed their fingers on the planchette, and Miguel called out to the spirits to contact them. After a few minutes, the pointer began to move, and they all made contact with the spirit. It claimed to be the ghost of a girl named Sarita, who was buried in the cemetery. The boys and girls asked the spirit many questions. All the questions were spelled out on the board. All of a sudden, Michelle felt something cold and clammy grab hold of her wrist. She let out a horrified scream. The teenagers were spooked and decided to end the game, but the spirit of the girl told them not to. The spirit said they had to keep playing or everyone would die. Miguel ignored the spirit's warning and snapped the Ouija board shut. They were about to leave when it suddenly became very dark. The teenagers could barely see anything in the cemetery. A strong wind rose and blew through the tombstones. Statues fell from their perches and shattered on the ground. When she saw this, Michelle freaked out and began to run. She couldn't see anything and stumbled blindly through the darkness. She then accidentally tripped and fell into an open grave. She landed on her head and broke her neck. Carlos ran out through the cemetery gates and stumbled into the road. Suddenly, a car came from around the corner and slammed into him, killing him instantly and squashing his body into a bloody mess. Carla and Miguel managed to get back to the safety of their homes. Carla was so scared that she decided to take a bath to calm herself down before she went to bed. However, when she was getting into the tub, she accidentally bumped into her cell phone and knocked it into the water. Unfortunately, her phone was plugged into the charger and Carla was electrocuted. The next morning, Miguel woke up and went downstairs for breakfast. His parents were waiting for him and broke the bad news. Miguel was surprised and frightened to learn of the deaths of all his friends. He knew he was next, but he didn't know what to do. Fearing for his life, he was desperate to get away. He went straight to the airport and took the first flight to Argentina. He was shaking with fear, but he managed to board the plane without any incident. However, when the plane took off, the engines failed and it crashed into the sea. His body was never recovered. Legend has it that after these incidents, no one ever dared to visit the cemetery on Halloween night.